to go over this topic. It's the future of AI ethics, what's currently happening in AI ethics, and you. What that means for you, what that means for how the space is evolving, what that means for us growing as human beings using AI in our everyday lives, and more importantly, how you break into this space because our voices are critical. So before I start there, I very much dislike and will always dislike presentation mode because I need to be able to see you. Okay. So I'm just going to zoom in and we're going to go through it so that I can see the deck because I'm very much engaged in seeing the reactions, making sure there are clarifications, and if in any way I can assist you kind of navigating the topic, I can. Before we start, my name is Nicole Jackson. I am a technologist and ethicist in the AI space. Um, I have been in this space for quite a few years, but before we get there, I'm going to go over the agenda and then I'll do a deeper dive in my introduction. Today, we're going to go over understanding and defining. It's kind of a casual introduction to the space for you all. It's going through some of the impetus that's driving AI governance and that's driving the expansion of AI and its overview. We're going to go through addressing AI intimidation. And what I mean by that is very simple. Oftentimes, I think that we, especially as women, we know there's already been gaps in technology, and we know there's already been gaps in our representation of AI, which I will go through. Um, we have a tendency to have imposter syndrome in this space because of backgrounds. Either we don't believe we're technical enough, or if we are technical, or we don't believe we're technical at all. And if we are technical, we may not be technical enough. And we don't really know what is required in the space. But I can tell you it is multidisciplinary. I can tell you that there are people with many, many backgrounds. And it's not just for technical experts, it requires a confluence of discussion and conversation amongst all the populations. Um, we're going to go through, I skipped three and dropped it on purpose. You'll see why when I get to it. Typically, when I go into three, I take a dive into all the segments of what's happening in AI. I'm going to show you that, knowing that this is only an hour, and then encourage you to dive further into it um, for a very intentional reason. We go to number four, which is discussing the impact of algorithms, the ethics, what's happening. I also want to go over some of the bills that are occurring, how many bills we should anticipate in 2025. Here's a fun fact: we're almost up to about 1,000 in the U.S. alone. And then finally, we're going to close with, we either rise together or we fall together. And what that means is if we don't pay very close attention to who's in the conversation and the discussion of AI, there's a high chance that we will fail. We can fall. So first, diving into my background, this is a very long paragraph that I have no intention of actually reading. I'm just going to be completely honest with y'all because it's honestly not that important. But at a highlight, I've been in digital transformation. I was head of digital transformation for quite a few years. Digital healthcare is where I spent the bulk majority of my career and patient experience as a CTO and in product and AI governance. I built things. I am actually the second generation. My mother was also in the software space. She was a software engineer. And so, I just gave an introduction to the team. I always like to tip my hat off to my mom. One of the reasons why I am so serious about AI ethics in this space is because my mom told me one time that when she was and this is like the 80s and 90s, right? She was like a part of the Y2K thing. When she was in, and I will expand this because I think it's probably important. So hopefully you all can see it. Um, when my mother was in this space, there were more women in technology at that time than there are today. And we've seen this significant decline in our participation in this space. And I think that's really important to talk about because we should anticipate an expansion. We need to go in the opposite direction. We are over 50% of the world population, and we are consumers of the economy. So it is completely unreasonable as we see the deeper development in this space with this technology that we are not more equally represented as those that are building and governing and all of the above. So I just wanted to bring that up. I'm very close to my mother, and she's currently, so you all keep her in your thoughts and your prayers. She is I'm battling cancer right now, and I'm her caregiver, and I'm actually on FMLA. But I really wanted to do this event because of those words. When I was telling her about it, she and I discussed it. I'm going to get out of presentation mode now. And I told her about the importance of your voices, your presence here. And that's why I still wanted to continue to give this presentation today. Um, I highlighted that because this picture was of a couple years ago in 2022. I mean very intentionally when I say about mentoring, and the impact my mother had in building me up in my career, I mentored girls for years in STEM, specifically in the technology space. And in 2022, I'm one of the 125 women that was part of the Smithsonian's display, the If Then display for women in STEM. And so I take this seriously. We take this seriously. And I wanted to make sure that you all knew that, after this, when I say reach out to me on LinkedIn, please do. Please keep in contact. Please ask questions because that's what I'm here for. Right. So my background, all the technologies, I've done a whole bunch of stuff. And I started to switch over to AI governance because for years I worked in the startup space building things. And I don't think I was really intentionally thinking about the things I was building. That's very transparent. And it matters because the things that we build affect populations. I was a part of patient experience, and in healthcare, all human beings are literally patients from the time we are born until the time we're sick and we pass away. And so, as you really think about that, that's every culture, that's every language, that's every human breathing. Really diving into why ethics matters, especially as we talk about the expansion of AI in so many parts of our lives, is super critical. And so that's my background. Now, before we start, if Halima's here, and I'm not sure if you still are, but if you are, if you could kick off that poll, that would be great. The last poll in the list, I want to target that one. And then I also want to pause to give you a chance to talk about any technical support stuff before I really dive into this presentation and we get going. So I posted a poll just to, understand how you all are feeling about AI. Um, it's really important to really understand where we are, why we're here, and where this is going. And so first we start with what is it? That's an important question. So Halima, real quick with a thumbs up. The last time I showed my screen and I went in presentation mode, did you see the full screen? With this is full screen share, or did you see the preview? Full screen, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, I'm gonna jump into it now. So boom, here we are. What is AI? AI, uh, and by definition, refers to systems that mimic human intelligence to perform tasks such as learning, reasoning, problem solving. And I wanted to give some examples because we use it and we've been using it, and for some reason, it in 2022 when ChatGPT came out, everyone all of a sudden said this is AI. AI's been here, y'all. You've been using it on social media. You know this because you have a playlist on your phone from Apple Music or whatever you're using that is giving you your algorithm, right? For the music that you're listening to. That's a component of AI. And you know this because you've been using Netflix the entire time. And something that's a fun fact, fun to play with. If you go to Netflix right now and you and someone else who has a Netflix account that is dissimilar than you, if you both go there, you know what you'll probably find? That the descriptions of the movies may be completely different, but it's the same movie. That's an algorithm. That's AI. That's it learning over the course of time through machine learning, your preferences, your interactions, and evolving. We know this from autonomous vehicles and Tesla. So that's the general idea. AI is essentially, a series of systems that have different forms of reasoning, that are there to mimic our intelligence to perform a task. Why is it growing? That's a more complex conversation. Um, AI had a big explosion in 2022 because of ChatGPT. Yes. Um, the AI is growing for a very different reason. So if you were to go to Google right now and you were to look up the term population decline, that might shock you. It is such an issue around the world that there are only 5 countries that are expected to grow in population around the globe over the next 100 years. Everyone else is declining in population. Everyone. And so as you look at that and you look at this other fun fact, I worked in healthcare for years and we were waiting for something called the silver tsunami. It's here. Baby boomers are retiring at 10,000 baby boomers a day. That's a lot of baby boomers retiring, just saying. So when you look at the population they represent in our economy, and you look at the things that we have to replace to maintain GDP, gross domestic product, yeah, it's an interesting confluence of this need for something that can take over those human tasks, do that problem solving, do that reasoning, because we don't have the human bodies to do it. And so there's an increased need for automation in things like healthcare and finance and education, due to those demography changes. And that force of change now brings us here. And why does that matter to you? Because it's not just technical people who are impacted by this. We are literally seeing whole industries adopt this. If you know someone that works in customer support and they already had an IVR system, which is, a virtual system for answering calls, you will start to notice the proliferation of AI tooling within it. And so, Halima, real quick, what were the results of that poll if we've closed it by now?
The results of the poll
Mm-hmm.
right now. Hold on. Let me go back to that one.
Well, for the first poll, how critical is interdisciplinary collaboration and diversity for ethical AI development?
That's right.
There were two answers. Both
Okay.
people answered essential for success.
Okay. Um, that's true. And I'm going to tell you why that's true in a pretty profound way. So it matters because as we start to build, create, grow, as we start to adopt, as we start to adapt, who is making the decision based on those algorithms is going to have a very critical effect to what it impacts, right? What do I mean by that? Well, here's an overview of AI systems, and we're going to get into it in a pretty interesting way. As we consider the different types of AI, we have a narrow focus, something that's very specific. Those are virtual assistants and image recognition, right? We have something a little broader. Machine learning is there to learn and predict tasks. We have general AI is hypothetical at best. General intelligence and general AI is this idea that these systems become smarter than us. We've seen sort of this evolution with OpenAI's new Strawberry. If you're familiar with it, is O1. And then artificial superintelligence is also theoretical. It's this idea that it takes over the world and it's the fear that everybody has with, the Terminator. As we kind of see this overview emerge, we see something else. We see themes that begin to sort of come about how the confluence of the data and the information affects our decision making and our decision theory. And so I'll pause here to say, in a super interesting way, I looked up this fun fact on where we're represented. Where are women showing up in this space? And I'm going to share my screen again. And I'm going to transition to this one. Boom, boom. Women comprise of only 22% of AI talent globally. This is as of 2024. A figure that drops, the figure drops less when we're talking about executives. People like me, we represent women overall. 50 plus percent of the population represent only 15% of the senior executives, only 22% of those working in this space. And that matters because as we take a look at these systems, who is making the decision? Who is making the decision to say what is valid to introduce into those AI systems? What data should be included in those AI systems? What the outcome of this AI system should be? We've seen the impact, the deeper impacts of this environment over and over and over again. So much so that if I were to look up all the different ways, just in a quick Google search, for AI and bias, which we will definitely get into in the detail, and we look up the ethical impacts, if we do not have the representation of more than 50 plus percent of the population, just as women, and then we just begin to disaggregate ourselves and say, well, what women? I bet you that number drastically changes. I bet you it does. And I know that because as a Black woman in this space, I promise you it does. When we take a look at how that can help double down on societal biases, how it helps to reinforce societal biases, we begin to see problems emerge. So I want to get back into the presentation and then I want to guide you all through a couple really interesting things that I have personally witnessed, that I've personally seen, and we'll get into the rest of the topics. I created this from a World Economic Forum tool a few weeks ago before this presentation. This tool allows me to look at different themes that are kind of emerging that lead us here. And the topic was about AI governance, and you can kind of see it in the core topics. It was navigating the intersection of AI adoption, governance, and population dynamics. That's dead in the center, right? And then what this tool does in a World Economic Forum, it looks for all of this data for all of these experts, I think they have like 1,500 different experts to do research in this space. They have a generative model that pulls in all the context and all the content to generate this tool. It's very, very interesting. And these are all the confluences of topics that are rippling through our lives right now. When we talk about the complexity, we're talking about issues of civic participation in healthcare and education, all the way over to the other side of all the countries that are now beginning to engage. When we look below, we can take a look at how this is a geopolitical issue and how it may actually affect international security and systemic racism and agile governance and social protection. And you can kind of see how this topic of AI ethics is kind of big, right? It's related to us as human beings, how we interact with systems, how systems interact with us, and who's making the decision for the systems at the outset. And so, as we sort of dive into this for the rest of the day, that's how I want you to think about it. You probably thought this was going to be a technical talk, and it is. We're going to talk about the systems level, but we're also going to talk about why I care very much about you engaging and participating in this space. Because of this, the biggest challenge that I think that I found when I ask people, well, why not you? Is that there is a perception of what AI is. And so AI, let me just help you now. When it's about system interaction and problem solving and algorithms, it's also about data, what data is included, what data is not included, who is represented in that data, and how an algorithm, which is a computation that asks you if I add this, and this, and I rank it, um, tell me what the outcome is based on prediction, because this thing is more than likely going to be the outcome if we're talking about a machine learning model. As we consider how the confluence of these things work together, we need to ask ourselves why we haven't invited more people who are not technical to the table. And I say that in a very intentional way. I just went through an AI training. It's a certification for a systems assessor with IEEE. And my instructor was actually a PhD who studied at Ohio State, who is now living in Germany. She's incredible. And her background is actually sociology. And at first, I was a little confused because I thought the program was going to be more technical. And then we started diving into the training, and I realized why it was not technical. It made so much more sense to me. We're talking about humans, full stop. Every single time we talk about AI systems and customer service, the first word is the customer, the second is service. When we talk about healthcare, we're talking about the care of health for humans. When we talk about finance, we're talking about managing the money of humans. And so at every single step of the way, we're talking about humans interacting with systems and how systems interact with people. And the way that those things run is through data. You cannot separate the two. Now, the question is, what data? And that's why you matter. When we talk about this challenge, we're talking about diverse contributions. It's more than technology. I think that I found some of the most impactful people to be the sociologists, believe it or not, and to be the attorneys, to be the people who understand the laws and the boundaries of them. I found them to be core literal ethicists that are asking really, really crucial questions about how a system should be used and if it should ever be used that way at all. And that is a profound, profound question that I think is probably the most intelligent question that any of you can ask. So if you think about moving into this space, and we'll get into all the different bias types in a bit, one of the first questions I want you to ask is the system appropriate to begin with? That is a big question because I keep seeing AI tools proposed everywhere, but no one ever asks why. Like, why do we need that? And did you think about the impact and who is it impacting? And how did you disaggregate the information for the people who you just impacted? Did you ask them? Did you engage with those populations? That's an ethical question. And this is where we need to be today. And so when we think about this being more than a technical challenge, the AI ethicists and consultants that I've met um, do have knowledge, but the knowledge is sometimes just about the populations. And I think that's super intriguing. And I'll give you a great example. I was working in the healthcare space, and I'm going to be very intentional, very intentional. And by all means, if anybody has any questions, chime in because I am here to ask them or answer them. Um, I was working on an application for a hospital, and I'm going to be intentionally discreet about what I'm saying. And this application was built with the latest iOS system at the time. I won't even age it to be intentional. And I remember a moment where I was meeting with some designers, and the designers, I mean, listen, the design was gorgeous. I said, wow, this is absolutely positively beautiful. But the population that we're serving, when I was driving through the community, they don't have the latest iOS devices, because that at the time would have been, a $700 or $800 device, and they're not kicking out that kind of money. So out of curiosity, who is this for? And also, how does it solve the problem? Because the problem we were trying to solve was about infant mortality rates and maternal mortality rates. Then there's this beautiful application with no practical application to the population. So why is it appropriate? Why now? Why this? There were so many other things that we could have done based on the existing tools that were available, but why do we choose that? And you know, and another really interesting story to kind of dive deeper for y'all. I remember, and I've been guilty of it too. I was building something out, and it was specifically there to target um, healthcare providers in a medical setting. I won't go too much further in description, but I never asked myself who was going through the medical training. And it was using natural language processing, which requires you to understand tone and dialects and language and, natural language processing. But I never asked myself when we were building these things out whether or not I considered the populations. Did I consider the accents? Did I consider all the other things? I don't know that I did. And as a result, did I build a sound tool that was good for the population, for the people who are under these people's care? That level of intentional thought is what's required from AI governance. And so as we kind of go through this journey together today, that's how I want you to think about it. I want you to kind of suspend and say, oh, what is it? And is it just a credential? It's actually you thinking very, 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 very deeply. And so I want to, kind of share something for you all when we at a high level of AI governance. Um, and sort of the ways that I've really heard this described, right? Um, when we think of through AI governance, a lot of people kind of imagine this, right? They think it's a structure, and it is. This is the operationalization of AI governance. Um, but it's not necessarily all there is in AI governance, because in each and every one of these boxes exists a human. So we consider at the business level, there are goals that, we as a company need to do. And that can include like some of the investments and budgeting, but it can also include like enterprise goals that they've made for the environment. As an example, we might have a company that says something like, listen, I need to make sure that I am, reducing my carbon footprint. Okay, awesome. And that's a goal for that organization. Well, at the AI governance level, this could be from a product standpoint strategy. And so for those of you who are thinking about getting into product or getting into engineering, this may be a space where your AI governance will show up. It'll be about what are you building and why, and have you considered the audiences that you're building for and the ripple effect. It could be responsible AI standards. And this is a shout out to Target, Tech Target. I think this is a great visual. I try not to include everybody else's stuff and my own stuff. So that's why I didn't put it in a presentation. I just out of, respect. But this is a great representation. Responsible AI, if you don't know what that is actually an organization. They've set up quite a few standards. I'm a member of Responsible AI. And essentially, it's a bunch of businesses and experts. It is a nonprofit, but it has Fortune 500 membership organizations, individual people, experts who are getting together to think through the impact of AI in a responsible way. You should consider this at the governance level of understanding the technical application of it. Like, what does it do and why is it doing the thing that you said? And does it do what you said? That's what responsible AI is. The methodologies and processes. How did you do it? And what vigor did you put into testing? And what technical process and frameworks do you have in place? So if you're on the technical governance side, or that's in an area you're interested in, that's where you fall. The risk management side, listen, they're my favorite people. Don't care. Never thought I would say that until this space really, really, really started to blow up. Risk managers are pretty much your attorneys. They're the people who hold your hand and say, "I hear you. That's a great idea, but it's not." You need to become friends with risk managers because they save you every time. And then regulatory compliance. That's actually a space that I'm also in. I didn't mention it earlier today because I don't really like to dive into bios and stuff. But one of the things that I am currently engaged in is the EU AIX Code of Practice. I'm one of the 49 Americans selected to review the code of practice, to give my feedback in the code of practice. Um, just so you know, the EU passed a pretty major AI act that obviously affects all the European Union. It went into effect a few months ago. The code of practice, the ways of working, you should consider it that. Will go into effect, I believe we're targeting March or April. And so we have a couple more sessions coming up. I can't really get into a lot of detail about the work being done there because that's their thing. But that matters because the EU is really leading. We have some states here, and I'll get into the legislation in a second and the things that are emerging, but that's regulatory compliance. What is happening outside and how does that affect what we're building? Depending on the industry, especially if you're in finance or you're in healthcare, that matters. Because if you are affected an international organization or you work for one, the EU AI Act is going to affect you, and there are whole things that you simply cannot do with artificial intelligence. They're considered high risk, and we get into the risk matrix, and we'll go from there. And then the technical team. This for years is the space that I played in until I started to float up here in these other spaces. But I was down here for a long time. This is my favorite place to play in because I know it well. But it's literally the technical apparatus on how you build. Now, y'all, this matters as you all begin to develop in this space. If you are going to fall on the technical side, you really do need to understand the tooling that's emerging. I really do mean that. If you're going to be using certain data sets, you need to really understand what that data is, what it does, and what it does not do, what it has, what it does not have, and we'll get there. Um, Teams and skilling. That is who has the skill set. Like, do you have a data scientist? And if you don't, why are you doing data sciencey things? Get some and or upskill in that area. Technology, data, and tools. This is intriguing. As you all begin to emerge, there are so many evolving tool sets available to you. But you also need to understand the efficacy of it. You need to understand what it is and dive deeper into those tools to protect yourself. And then AI performance metrics and enterprise integration. AI performance metrics is, does it do what we say it does? Does it perform the way it does? And then enterprise integration is enterprise IT integration. Those are your co-pilots and other tools that you're using for efficiency. That's kind of how you see this at a continuum. Um, I mentioned compliance, and I want to share one more thing. Again, these are not again, I'm not going to sit here and redo things that other people are doing, but I do want to tell you where this is going. I thought that this was a really key statistic, and I want to tell you why AI governance matters right now in a nutshell. State lawmakers across the United States introduced 700 AI related bills in 2024 across 45 states. There was a period, before my mom got ill, where I was very heavily engaged with a couple different states. One of them is Texas, actually, and their AI legislation is massive. Um, I will tell you that you will see this explode next year. And so it is very wise for you all to really consider a role here for you, to really understand this space and to get through it. Because as you begin to continue to see the proliferation of bills, whether or not they're national or international, um, there's an opportunity there for you. So I want you to be excited about it because you can be many, many things from many backgrounds. And I think that there's going to be a lot of career development for y'all coming up in the near future. And so now we get into why I said all that to get here. Different roles or different goals, different roles. Each role that's participating in a space has its own goal. Um, Artificial intelligence is multi-layered. Listen, I've worked with computational linguists, which especially on the natural language processing side, statisticians, love my statisticians and math people, human-centered designers, people who are thinking about how people are interacting with the systems. My attorneys, shout out, I promise you, I did not care until I cared. And obviously my computer scientists, ethicists, and then my subject matter experts. I said that with intention. Um, the most important starting show is always the subject matter expert that knows that data set. Um, many roles, single goal. Talk about the EUAIX code of practice. But what I've noticed more than anything is we come from all different backgrounds. There are artists that are engaged, literally fighting the fight for what these image generated systems are doing. They are fighting the battle for copyright. There are copyright attorneys that are engaged. There are software engineers and data scientists. There are researchers. There are tech moguls. Everyone is at the table having this conversation. There's like 1,000 of us really exchanging and really listening and reading each other's feedback. So it's very interesting. And then finally, many plans, many paths. Okay, so could fully anticipate for other people to find useful ways for AI to do something new. And your job in AI ethics is to say, should it? How does it work? Why does it work that way? And who did you miss? Right? Because you're going to miss someone because there are so many different lenses and views of a tool. So, you know, this is my favorite part. And so I'm going to pause. And while I'm going through this, I think it's a good time to pull up or send out um, the next poll. And I'm kind of indiscriminate in the order at this point because all of these topics will come together. But if I had to pick one, it would be the first one, which is about like the societal impact, right? Um, AI biases. This says 3, and I'm going to move into it because 3 equals 4. I promise you it does, right? I heard someone come off mute.
Yeah, the answer to that one was for AI biases, second poll. Selection by non-representative data set.
So that's interesting. I'm gonna get into this. I don't.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So for what the area of society do you think AI will impact the most in the next 5 years? People are answering. The majority say employment and workforce dynamics, and then like the second is privacy and civil liberties.
Both are correct, and you should expect, based on the type of AI, for that to be a different answer for a different reason. So I'm going to get into that and talk about bias because this is going to be interesting. We have to talk about this, and we have to get to a point of talking about it in great detail, in a way where we're comfortable, in a way that we're saying bias doesn't gaslight a room, because bias means many things to many people, and somehow this word got hijacked and now means something that it never meant. So AI biases are real because we as humans have bias, period. Like, period. I myself have built things and not thought about the ripple effect. And I just gave you an example of that earlier. I cared more about building the thing with natural language processing, and we're going to use English, and we're going to do these things. Awesome. Also, I completely forgot about the populations of people who are going through medical school, the journey that they took here, the potential accents they have, the dialects that they have, the audiences that they're impacting, all of the things, all of the other people who may be in a room with them while they're rendering care. What schools did they go to? What are their backgrounds? What are their accents? What do I need to know about them? Because I was so busy focusing on building something. And I think that's probably a lot of people. Um, when we talk about AI bias, being reinforced in algorithmic decision making, I need you to understand that this is not something that's coming, it's something that's here and it's been here. There are whole lawsuits that have been going on for literally years. There are whole issues emerging from this for literally years, starting with credit cards. For a long time, this was a problem. Actually, fun fact, look up the history of FICO 10. Why did FICO 10 come about? Look it up. These are the ways that we have to understand how these things affect our lives, and they always have. We just didn't know, right? And so I will say that the finance industry probably has some of the most advanced rules and regulations regarding algorithmic bias, but they could go further. As you start to look at the things people are building with, the most popular ones right now are generative models, you might need to start understanding what model cards are and read them. And if you don't understand them, then literally be okay and comfortable with looking at it with what's called a model card and understanding how that thing was trained and tested. Because if you're considering building something for a specific population and that model card is not doing too well in some of their, bias swap tests or in some of the other tests that they could do, you might find yourself running into a problem, right? And, where there is smoke, there's fire. And so I told you there were lawsuits. I'm not kidding. Listen, there are class action lawsuits right now about how this affects rent. Listen, I sent this presentation maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. That thing was published 6 days before. These news articles are quite literally happening in real time. Machine learning bias, what Google tells you how you want to hear it. Like, that's not good. That's called a confirmation bias. We will confirm what you said. Yes, you're right. That's not good, right? Um, Listen, getting to the center. AI experts call for an end to UK use of racial bias algorithms. What? Gender bias in AI, building fair algorithms. Listen, I could have a whole. I used to work for an organization that was focused on women in the workplace. I promise you, I can have an entire deep dive on that, and it would be quite frightening for you. Um, Bias against speakers of African American English. Did you see that? That's right here. A little fun fact for you. Um, we need to sort of understand at a more and with the level of depth um, what these systems are doing. Really popular one, Science Magazine. Not a small thing. It's the oldest science publication in the world. ChatGPT and other AI tools are hidden full of racial biases. Yes, they are. And that would be because the data that they're trained with are racially biased. The systems themselves are just systems. They're not, they're not human. They are a mirror reflection of us as a population. And so the biases that we experience externally are the biases that we, in our day-to-day interactions show up in the data. And that should not shock you if you've just been on the internet, right? And so there are kind of layers to this. There's the understanding of the statistical and computational biases. There's the human biases and the systemic biases. What does that mean? Well, let's take a look. I pulled a whole bunch of these together because I want to pause to tell you that when I did, um, y'all, this is not inclusive. This is just 20. There are hundreds of bias types, hundreds. And their entire website's dedicated to collecting all the different bias types. And I guarantee you that we're probably going to create new ones, right? The first one we talk about is algorithmic bias. And I'm not going to go through the list extensively, but there are some that I think are worth talking about. Um, I mentioned one of the questions was like, which one do you think is the biggest risk and about algorithmic bias? But algorithmic bias is designed and trained, for favoring an outcome. It's called weighting. It's a weighted score. An outcome for whom? That's a great ethical question that you should ask, right? But one of the things that I think are the most prevalent, selection bias. You just saw that, right? We go back to this article. This is what that's saying. It's saying here with Google, the bias machine, how Google tells you what you want to hear. That's a form of selection and confirmation bias. Selection bias, and I put the definitions here for you, just so you know some of the things that you would have to look for as an ethicist. Um, the training behind it that can lead to skewed outcomes. And confirmation bias, we're looking for patterns and assumptions about data that essentially confirm what we want to hear. Um, Listen, there's automation bias. Listen, I see this everywhere. I promise you I do. I see people generating AI generated stuff every day and sending it to me. And I'm like, that is actually wrong. Just so we're on the same page. Hate to break it to you. That's not even a fun fact because it's not a fact at all. And that is happening prolifically, especially in education. And so as you start to have over reliance on a tool or a machine, you begin to trust the response because it looks like it's trustworthy. It is not. Labeling bias. This one is a good one to talk about. Labeling bias occurs at the human interaction level. I clicked too fast. There we go. In order for machine learning to happen, there's something called supervised learning and unsupervised learning. Supervised learning is when we are labeling and clicking things. And unsupervised means that we believe the things that were clicked, and now it's starting to understand based on interactions and outcomes, and that's how it starts to autonomously reweight itself. Who labeled that bias? Who labeled the data? That's how we get biases in data. If there are entire people who are omitted from that process, you might mislabel something because you never even had that lens or that view. And so this is why I have this one highlighted. Availability data. This is a big one. It's placing too much emphasis on data that's most readily available or easily accessible. Well, what happens to populations that you can't get data on? I don't know, like the homeless. What happens to populations that you can't get data on? I don't know, meaning like those that may represent disabled populations, because you may not see them interacting with systems and society in the same way. And so this is where this becomes really dangerous, right? Because we have all types of things happening with data and many bias types. And so that's why bias becoming a loaded word is kind of interesting. But we can go to the second page and say, well, what about cultural bias? It's when you fail to understand the cultural differences. I see this a lot. this idea when we see someone is Latino or Hispanic or Asian, like what does that mean? Right? Because like you have Filipinos and you have like the Japanese, and that's not the same cultural boundary. And you have African Americans and you have Haitians and you have Jamaicans and you have Africans who may be Nigerian or Ghanaian, and we may all be black, but we may be different. We will be different. That's why that matters. We have, of course, historical biases. We see this all the time, especially in the public justice and safety space, but in healthcare in profound ways. Whole people whose population or whose data is never captured. A great example for you all, and I'll kind of kill this screen real quick to see some engagement. A great lens for historical bias is actually in the sampling process for clinical trials. Oftentimes entire populations are underrepresented. And so when the clinical trial data comes out, the question is, well, who did you include in it? And do you have the right representation of the population? Because it matters. A drug is often impacted by genomics. And so I'm introducing this to you all to say all of these bias types are just 20 samples of all the ways that you have to kind of look at the data and engage and ask deeper questions. It is understanding how to like look behind the veil and say, what does it do and how was it trained? Which then leads us to this final part of rising and falling together. Because if I don't have more people engaged in this space, if you don't have more people engaged in this space, if we don't, then there is a high chance of failure. I ask you to not become enraged, but be active instead become engaged. Um, Ask the question. Look at a system and say, why was it built that way and who did it include? Um, the opportunities are bountiful. Get started. I'll show you how to do that in a second. And then, don't ignore the smoke, ignite the fire. You need to really look at systems and look at the articles and say, wait a second, how did you even get there? Like, how did you literally get there? And so, for you all moving into this space, we need cross functional alignment. That's what business leaders and business goals. That's your subject matter experts. What does the system do? Right? And asking that question is sometimes just a subject matter expert level for somebody, as an example, in a call center who just knows the individuals who will be calling in and what they'd be calling in for. That person should be in a room because if we're going to build out a system that helps someone navigate and you've been answering a phone for years, right? Think through this. Or that there's just a bit that's been answered for years. Remember to include those people in a conversation. Ask and engage because they know the populations and know all the languages that may need to be spoken. They know the age ranges of the population. They know the interaction level data that others who are just trying to build a system, which was me for a long time, don't necessarily think through. Um, on the risk management side, we need people who are really thinking responsibly. Those are the adults in the room. I hate to say it, but I wasn't always one of them, right? The people who are saying, why do we need to build that? Like, is that a good idea? Like, what about all the bad things that can happen? Be vocal about that and engage there. And then finally, the model builders. We need people who are going to build out the ecosystem. And that could be people who are those who are investing, but those could also be people who are literally building. And so for you, that is understanding the data set because it takes that confluence of people to really create and innovate, right? The right things, the right ways with the right audiences. And so finally, as I promised, the training pathways. You have options. There's a lot on Coursera, and I say that because I actually think that like most of their stuff's free. And so I just want you to engage. They have a range of different skill sets. And so look for the ones that focus if you want to go on the technical side for machine learning and natural language processing and computer vision. And computer vision. I'm gonna say that again. And computer vision, because the visual depictions of things matter too. Remember that. Um, you have Google Clouds and AI machine learning. I think this one is interesting. It's kind of a broader view and it can go pretty detailed into the technical side. Um, the IBM training tools are honestly incredible and they focus very much on ethical, responsible AI governance. I believe some of their language may say trustworthy AI. You'll find that they're often the same thing. Um, for the technical boot camp or the ethics boot camps, data camps, AI ethics course, I've not taken this one, but I've actually heard people speak very well of it, and it kind of integrates Coursera's ethical thing into it. I personally went through the IEEE certified AI ethics certificate program. I'm like a couple days away from becoming an authorized assessor for IEEE, so I'm very excited about that. And then finally, Oxford. I added this one in because I think that you're going to find a deep emergence internationally on the build side and on the engagement side. And I want you to look at this from an international lens because you need to, right? Like if you don't, you're making a mistake. You'll find growth there. You actually may find some job opportunities, frankly, throughout the EU and the world. Australia's passed some pretty heavy legislation. New Zealand's passed some pretty heavy legislation. A lot of South America's passed some really heavy legislation. And as you kind of see this, obviously Canada has. As you kind of see this emerge, it might be a good opportunity for you if you are interested in international travel or international engagement. And then finally, I want to leave you with this. When we think about the people who are most negatively impacted by AI systems, they're often the ones least represented in the development and deployment of these systems. Um, I can't say enough about this woman. She has been pretty much the foundation of rock. Her background is impeccable. And we need more people talking and engaging and understanding. And that's how we protect ourselves and each other. And so, with that, I'm leaving it open for questions. We have about 10 minutes or so. If anyone has any questions about how to engage in this space, any goals, and be happy to kind of go over that with you all.
You killed it. First of all, second of all, any questions that you guys have, please, please, please feel free to take advantage of this opportunity. Throw them in the chat, throw them in the QA. This was phenomenal. I am reeling. Please come back.
Yeah,
That was amazing.
good.
That was
Yeah,
every second of that.
yeah, I want we need more people in this space, engaged and understanding. And it is not going to be developers that are managing this. It's going to be human beings that know what the real life experience of being a human being is, to understand why we need to really have a conversation about how you are about to affect me. And so really ask the question, why does it work that way? And what data did you kill? Or what data did you use? Right. And listen, I mean it in a very real way. I remember looking at one algorithm, and I, I listen. I wish I could get into more detail about some of these things. I can't, but I promise you, I wish I could. But
When you're ready to, we're here.
I, yeah,
We
yeah,
we have one question that just
yeah.
jumped in the chat, and I'm gonna pop this out a little bit. So, what do we do with all the tech companies backtracking on diversity? Um,
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts on that actually. Um, I think that people are saying a lot of things vocally. And I think that the legislation is saying something completely different. And it's all fun and games until we start having lawsuits. And so that's a really blunt way for me to say that. And I mean that because I've seen what GDPR did. GDPR, so you all know, is the EU's privacy policies, privacy laws.
Mhm.
And that's why you actually have like some of the changes that you have with cookies. That's actually why it's here, where it's like, hey, can we take your data? They didn't care before, you care now,
They still
don't you?
don't care. They still
That
don't care.
listen, they say that, but you notice now they're like, oh, can we access your data? Would you like us to use your data? Would you like to opt out? And the whole world said opt out. No, thank you. No, you cannot have my data, right? The reason why is because if you look up GDPR, and I'll do that real quick, just so you understand the greatest fines we've ever seen. Biggest GDPR fines. Let's see. Let's do a roll back in time. Oh, they're pretty big. Here is a good one. Ba-ba-da-ba. Here you go, y'all. That's a lot of money, no matter how you put it. $1.2 billion. The legislation is starting in this space, and you should anticipate that at some point, um, they will be big enough to make people not care because it's an ethical thing or it's the right thing, but they care because they don't want a lawsuit. That's the why. But if we're not aware of what the systems are doing, who's going to get blamed? And so it is extremely important for all of us to understand what these systems are doing and why they're doing it. And I'm not saying that, like, if you think that you're going to get people to participate every time with a carrot, and that carrot is, the ethical good of the world, that's wrong. Let that assumption go. We live in a world where people care about money. And I just think that's a thing that we should just admit and confess and say, okay, at the other side, that money means also that they don't want to fine and they don't want a lawsuit and they don't want to be held accountable. And so when you see things like the EU AI Act, Build a Code of Practice, and you see some of the states like New York who say you will not be using this in an HR system, and you see Colorado say these are all the ethical ways that you will not be using this. And that is because we're setting up a scenario where the businesses will ensure that they don't break that ethical boundary. But it's super critical for us to ensure that we understand what those ethical boundaries are. And the way that we do that is by looking at how the system's built, what data it was trained on, what it was trained to do. Did it actually do what it said it was going to do? And in what ways are we going to understand what data trained and where you got it from, and whether or not the data was even available, or whether or not it was excluded or ranked appropriately to ensure that we're protecting ourselves? And this is why this topic matters so much today. Because if we don't start with that level of questioning from an AI ethical standpoint, that we don't understand what the systems are doing, and we can't even engage in a discourse and conversation.
That leads into the next question. How far are we from getting federal regulations in the states regarding AI development and the data sets that are being used?
So it was October of 2022. Um, Actually, it was October 30th of 2022 or 2023. I remember this distinctly. I was in Texas and just found out that there was an executive order passed by Biden um, at the federal level to really take a look at some of the boundaries. The states at this time are all making their own decisions on what that means. And in surprising ways, like some states that I think I would have anticipated being a little bit more conservative have been very intentional about mentioning algorithmic bias as an example. We still don't have a federal privacy law. So, fun
Oh,
fact, y'all. We nobody knows. So we don't have one. We need one desperately. Um, I think what we should anticipate. We do know that there are plans to potentially roll the 2023 executive order back. It will need to be replaced with something. I would just say that without getting any political or anything else, it would need to be replaced with something. I think what you'll find is you might find the companies themselves asking for some guidelines, because it's extremely hard for a company that may be, operational in all 50 states, because you in the United States, but you're also international, and you have to adhere to the EUAI Act. Period. If you're going to operate over there, you'll be adhering to that. And if you also operate in Australia, well, they got one too. And if you also operate, within any of the other countries, you have to operate in theirs. The United States asking companies to operate independently across different state boundaries is complex. And so what they'll typically do is do the thing that's the most complex, because they'll be compliant for all of the above. Um, that's what you should anticipate. So, long answer to that question, you may not ever see federal, because we don't have it for privacy yet. Frightening, huh? I know.
all right. Next
Hmm.
question. What
Hmm.
responsibility do individual contributors have to ethics of AI use in the workplace?
That's a good question. And I think that is largely dependent on if you're in the United States, the state, and if you are a global entity, the role. So we know when we talk about it in the European lens, we talk about like deployers and we talk about operators. Individual level accountability is not there. It's pretty much at the organizational level. You might see companies start to push back if they have to start paying some of the fines and say, no, we need to hold people accountable individually, not different than HIPAA. If worked in health IT for a long time, in HIPAA, you can be held accountable individually for violating someone's HIPAA rights, right?
Mhm.
You might start to see some of that emerge. I think if it becomes too financially unfeasible for some companies. And I think that that's when it'll get real for a lot of people. It'll get real, real quick. It's like, wait a second, I really need to know what they're talking about right here. Can I do this? That's when you'll see that conversation shake.
But unfortunately, I don't even see that kind of regulation or accountability when it comes to people like myself, engineers, developers, and when we create tools because they give us enough
I know.
information or enough education to be dangerous.
Yeah.
But that's
I
another
know.
conversation for another day.
Hmm.
Kayla is asking, how can normal non-tech focused citizens be informed about AI and how it's affecting our policies and our way of life? I feel like AI literacy is very low.
That is a statement to be, yes, it is. I would say that AI literacy, data literacy, and digital literacy are the things that are missing the most. If you want to be informed, I want you to go to Google and set up a Google alert. And I want you to look up AI bills, AI laws, AI policies, and it will come to your inbox every day. And this is why. I promise you I do it. Every morning, I read all of the crazy things that are happening around the world. And I ask myself, is anyone else reading this? Because if they were, they would say this might be the biggest digital transformation failure in history, right? Like no one's doing it right. But you need to follow it. You need to set up Google alerts and you need to be aware, specifically on lawsuits and impact. You really, really, really want to look at like keywords like bias, algorithms, things like that are really good keywords to follow on a regular basis because you're starting to see a trend emerge. And you want to, if you get really good at it, you might want to start asking yourself, what did they build it on? That is a real question. What did you build it on? You can begin to see the patterns from some of the, especially the generative models, and say, not all generative models are equal. I would just leave it there.
All right. One of our last questions, how can non-tech individuals start looking for opportunities in the AI space?
Depending on your background, like I said, I've seen like social scientists have an impact. I've seen educators actually listen. I've seen like literally teachers crush it in this space. Um, Especially English teachers, which is really interesting. Because they're already predispositioned to think in a very qualitative way. And
Mm.
a lot of the problems that we see emerging from a humanistic standpoint are qualitative, right? I've seen history teachers kill it in this space. Why? Because they know what could go wrong. They've seen this before,
Know the
right?
patterns.
So when you really think about your background, think about your strengths. Like where are your strengths at? And then, like I said, I don't care if you just feel free to share this deck afterwards to anyone because I put the courses in there. You feel free to look through those courses and to really dig into them. I would tell you that you will never be able to fully avoid technology because it's a technical thing. You should not want to, which is why I mentioned imposter syndrome is we have intentionally created a boundary where people are afraid of it. Stop. That was intentional before everyone else. Women were like literally the computers, right? They were computing. So stop running from it. But the role that you choose to play is very open and flexible and can be on guiding what the systems are and the subject matter expertise, or it can be on building the systems or anything in between.
Amazing.
Okay.
Amazing. And you guys had amazing questions.
Yeah. Well, this was great. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach us. I'm Nicole Jackson, one of like a million. Sorry, nothing I can do about that. Got married
No,
to an indiscreet name.
they're not
I don't
gonna
know what to
forget
do.
you at all. You're not mistakable
But feel free to
whatsoever.
reach out, and I'd love to connect with everyone. We could definitely have a deeper dive or conversation. And if you want guidance on career opportunities and everything, let me know, and I'll see the best I can connect you with. Okay.
Thank you,
Amazing.
Nicole. Thank you,
All
everybody,
right.
for participating.
Thanks,
Please fill
y'all.
out the survey. Thank you so much.
Thanks. See y'all.
Have a great day.